Welcome to the Client Generation Podcast, a show where we interview some of the most successful people in real estate to help you understand how to generate leads, build a brand, and convert more clients in your business. What's up, everybody? Grant Weiss here. Welcome to the Client Generation Podcast. I'm so excited for our guest today. I was speaking at an event recently, and this woman that had this yellow pantsuit and this infectious energy was something that everybody was fascinated by. And I got to know her. Her name's McCall Jones with Charisma Hacking. And she has this really unique way of helping people understand how to improve from a video content perspective and a number of other ways. And I'm going to let her dive into that. So McCall, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited to help your people. It'll be so fun.
I love it. I think everybody's going to love this episode for sure. You have amazing energy, and I really appreciate it. I was walking off the stage, and McCall, she flagged me down. She's like, "Hey," and I stopped and I just walked up, give her a big hug. It felt like the type of personality that would be acceptable. And
you were amazing. You were the best. I was just fangirling. It's fine.
Yes, I love it. Okay, so for everybody listening, just who are you? Give us the brief backstory and what on earth is charisma hacking?
Yeah. So I have a company, like you said, called Charisma Hacking. I help people be more likable and more persuasive on video. So I have figured out, it really is a science, and we'll talk about that, how to get people to pay attention to you, to trust you, and to act, to do what you say. The way that I started Charisma Hacking, I have a background in performing. I was a performer for 20 years. I performed in front of people in front of my face, over 1 million people on TV for tens of millions of people. And when I was young, I had a lot of pressure on me. Obviously, as a young performer, that happens. And I also, I went from doing talent shows to doing crowds of 35,000 people over the course of a couple months. That combined with the fact that I had a dad that, unfortunately, if I would mess up on stage, he wouldn't speak to me for days at a time at home because I embarrassed him in front of his friends. So it was a really high stakes environment, and I would start blacking out on stage. What that led to was just me watching the people that I was fortunate enough to be on the program with and breaking down what made them charismatic. And really, in my brain back then, it was what made people clap. So I took that, and I've been doing it my whole life, just figuring out the really small kind of checklist things that give people charisma, because I was always afraid that my it factor that people said that I had would go away. And I would get anxiety that I couldn't control it. So I figured out a way to kind of bottle the it factor. I've been helping people do just that in a way that is actually, you'll learn, I really don't like the word authentic because I feel like people don't know what that means, but in a way that it gives them the advantage that they have when they meet people in person, but on video and on podcasts and on stages. And it's worked really well. It's worked really well for real estate agents as well. So I'm pumped to tell you guys all about it.
I love it so much. I watched you working, and I was so intrigued. I was like, what's she doing over there? Because you would get somebody to record a video, and then this whole subgroup of people would cheer like crazy and celebrate. And as I watched you work, you were giving people these names. It seems like you've come up with these categories and stuff like that. So can you walk me through this process of charisma hacking, and what, as I watched you teaching people how to get better on video, what were you calling them? What were you were giving them names and stuff like that. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a process called charisma styles. And what your charisma style is, you and every single person on the face of the planet is one of 54 different combinations of charisma styles. It makes up who you are as a person. And it is the thing that makes people pay attention to you, trust you, and do what you say. So the way that we created this charisma styles program is I charisma hacked 1,000 people. I went on Clubhouse. I did it with 500 people there. I, interviewed 100 funnel hackers in a very specific entrepreneurial community. And I asked myself, what gives them the ability to get people to pay attention to them, trust them, and do what they say? And then, we did it what we call bottom up instead of top down. I didn't think of categories that people could fit into and then place them in those categories, but we said, what are all of the possible ways that people are doing this? And then we fed it into what's called a K-cluster analysis. And we literally, with science and math, came up with these categories that people were clumping into. So these charisma styles, there's one thing that's called the score, and this is how good you are at it, but the styles are actually how you do it. So it's how you get people to pay attention to you, right? There are 6 different entertainment styles that you can use or that you do use in your real life to get people to pay attention to you. One of them is right for you and the others sabotage you and don't work for you. There's 3 ways, we call it compassion. There's 3 ways to get people to trust you. One of them works for you, the others are sabotaging you. And there's 3 different ways to get people to act. One of them is right for you, the others are wrong for you. The thing that we found is the thing that sabotages people on video is using the wrong charisma styles. And there's a lot of different reasons why people do this. They use the wrong charisma styles because somebody has told them, we call it a two-face, that they're too much of something or that they're trying to compensate for something, right? There's other people who are trying to model people that they shouldn't model because they've heard that that's the best way to success is modeling people who are successful, which I agree with if you model the right people. But charismatically, if you're modeling somebody who doesn't have your same charisma styles, it actually can shoot you in the foot and it can really sabotage you. And then we talked about, sales scripts, and a lot of people use sales scripts from people, and it will be crazy successful for the person that gave you the script, but then it won't work for you, even though it's working for other people in the program. And the reason for that is because you don't have the same authority style as them. And you have to phrase things differently, right? So we broke this down. And like you said, like, what names was I giving them? On site at this awesome event that we both spoke at, shout out Krista Mayshore, she's incredible. But at this event, the cool thing is this categorization process, giving people their charisma styles, just opens up their eyes to the specific tools that they actually use in their real life and the tools that they should be using on video. And then I would show them and I'd be like, oh, you are pulling to this two-face. You are trying to compensate by trying to be like this person when you're not like that person. You should try to be like this person. So we have 12 different charisma styles, like I said, 54 different combinations between them, and each person has that unique combination of 54 things, and then they have those false faces that they pull to. So I was giving them their charisma styles and I was saying, you are this, and as soon as I would tell them, they're like, oh, I see. And when I would tell them what their false faces were, or the faces that they were not supposed to use, they would be like, oh yeah, somebody has told me that I'm too aggressive, so I try to make myself smaller. You're right? It's just this really quick way to categorize people that helps them improve in actually a systematic way, instead of just being like, well, be more yourself or have more energy or all of those things that actually don't work. They actually don't move people to, acting or converting or trusting you. They may get people's attention, but it's the wrong kind of attention, and then it turns them off.
That is incredible. I would imagine that gives somebody so much more confidence. Real estate agents, we do a ton around video content. It's one of the core principles of what we teach, specific to dynamic remarketing. So a lot of times we're teaching an agent how to take video content that they're creating and then strategically target market that to a buyer lead or a seller lead to ultimately convert them into becoming a client or customer. Most of the agents that we work with are very timid at first. They're very shy of the camera. They've got a lot of fear, anxiety built up around this. And it sounds like what you're saying really can help them solve that by helping them gain more understanding of who they should be and what they should sound like and how they can maybe possibly feel like whenever they're creating that video content. Sounds like it's so valuable.
Yeah, we completely switch the measure of success when it comes to video. So a lot of times the things that we found, and all of this is based on the data that we have, but people measure success by the amount of videos that they're doing instead of what each individual video does for them, right? So they measure success as like, okay, I'm no longer scared on video and I have this many videos published, right? Which the reason why people do that is because it's the only metric that's been available so far, right? They're like, oh yeah, I think I'm succeeding because I'm not scared anymore. When the rule with charisma hacking is if it feels awkward, it's because it looks awkward, but that actually gives our people great hope because we break down with a very specific framework. Here's what about it looks awkward. Here's why it feels awkward, right? If you feel awkward on camera, the camera is not making you feel awkward. You're doing something on camera that is awkward, right? You're moving your arms in a way that you would never move them in real life. So of course you feel awkward, right? So that comfortability, what happens is people, in order to quote unquote find their voice, they continue to publish, but they do it until they are comfortable instead of until they are effective at being themselves, and instead of being effective at, increasing watch time and engagement rate and conversion rate. Those people who are comfortable on video, sometimes I tell them, well, you probably should be still scared on video because it's not working, right? So this fear that people have, in a matter of 10 minutes per person at this event, we changed them. Some of them had never recorded a video before, but the reason why it was no longer scary is because they were able to actually be themselves instead of having to change when they get on camera. And it took that fear away. Instead of saying, well, repetition, 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 repetition. It's like, no. If you do it the right way, it takes all of that fear away because you're practicing doing the right things. And when you analyze your videos, you no longer hate it because you know specifically what to look for. You say, oh, well, does it look off? Okay. And then we go through this thing I call the model framework. We're like, okay, well, was the movement different? Were you saying things differently with your voice, right? Would you ever say that sentence in real life? And if not, then we change it, right? So we change it from saying, how many videos have you published? And we consider that success to how effective is each video for your business, right? With all these real estate agents, the reason why they're so successful is because in person, they establish relationships with people very, very quickly, right? I met so many real estate agents at that event who came up to me and I immediately liked them. I immediately was like, oh yeah, I'd buy a house from you. Oh yeah, I'd sell my house with you, right? But the problem is when they get on video, that immediate relationship building skill goes away because they're not being themselves, because they're trying to change things because video is a new thing for them, right? Or they don't know how to give themselves that advantage that they have in person. So that's what we do with Charisma Styles. We say, oh, we're just giving you the advantage back, right? The advantage that you have, right? I know nobody would say no to you in person. So we have to make sure that we give you that advantage on video. Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. I love it. I love everything that you're saying. Okay. I know that you charisma hacked me while I was speaking. So I'm very fortunate. I've been able to travel and speak for the last 6, 7, 8-ish years. And I've gotten very comfortable doing it, but I'm always interested in how I can improve. So I would love, and for everybody listening to the podcast, I've never had a conversation with McCall about this before. So kind of like live here in a podcast, she's going to charisma hack me and hopefully help me understand how I could certainly improve. So McCall, permission fully granted. What was it about my presentation that was good? How can I improve? Can you walk me through your process, like charisma hack me?
Absolutely. So yeah. So first thing I have to say is the content of your presentation was crazy. It was amazing. It was so good. And your presentation was amazing. So I'm going to show you, I have all these notes. I'm going to show you how to improve. And it'll actually start to make a lot more sense as I explain things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through what these charisma styles are. And we're going to, well, I did not have you agree to this before, so you can say no, but I want you to guess what you think you are first. And then I'm going to actually tell you what you are. Yeah. So the first comment,
I like how before we got this started, you like put your hair up because like, you're like, all right,
let's go.
I'm about to get this party started. Okay, perfect. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so the first charisma style that we have is called our authority style. Now, this is how we get people to move to action. There are 3 different ways that you can move somebody to action. The first one's called light. Light, people say trust the process. The more you trust their process or their path or their system or their framework, the more likely you are to move to action. So a perfect example of this, I don't know if your audience is familiar with Russell Brunson, but Russell Brunson, he owns a company called ClickFunnels. He's one of the co-founders, and he says funnels are the thing, right? He says my framework, or anytime he's teaching a story framework or whatever, that's what's in the center. He says my framework is the thing that will work for you, right? The more people buy into the fact that his framework is the thing that will work for him, the more likely they are to move to action, right? Then we have lift. Lift people say trust yourself. So lift people focus on the person that's in front of them or the clients that they work with. So they are not in the center, but the person is. So they would say, you know, if a funnel worked for Grant, a funnel can work for you. This is what you need to do if you're just like Grant, right? So that's lift. Finally, we have lead. Lead people say, trust me. They say, if I can do it with them, I can do it with you. Here's my experience, right? My experience tells me that this is the way that you need to go, right? So I'll explain it with one more analogy, and then I'm going to have you guess what you think you are. I'm going to tell you. So imagine we have 3 different vehicles all going to a location, right? They're all going to get there at the same time. However, they get there or how they get there is completely different. So light, which is trust the process, says this bus is going to this location. All I have to do is convince you to get on this bus. If I can convince you to get on this bus, then you'll arrive safely, right? That is light. Lift says, I think my client should be in the driver's seat. I think I should be in the passenger seat, giving them directions. Because when we arrive at the location, I think it would be more beneficial for my client to have taken all of those turns. That's lift, right? Then we have lead. Lead says, I should be in the driver's seat. If I'm in the driver's seat, then we will arrive safely, right? I will have taken all the turns. If a pedestrian runs out in the middle of the road, I should be in the driver's seat. So between light, trust the process, the bus, lift, my client should be in the driver's seat, trust yourself, and lead, I should be in the driver's seat. What do you think that you are?
Awesome. I heard a mixture. So probably not asking right. If I was gonna, I guess one, I would say light. I would heard a mixture of light and lead. So I don't know where I felt, but that's
okay. So one more thing that your audience and you should know is we have these things called false faces, and the false faces are just as important to know as our styles, because this is the thing that is sabotaging us. Now, with these false faces, I literally have these things called false face consequence keys that I'll show you when we're done with our interview, because I know people can't see this on audio. But what these false face consequence keys do is I can tell you what your false face is, the one that you are trying to use that is sabotaging things, and actual phrases that you may be using that could like lose you sales or lose you trust or lose you or make people not pay attention to you. So with these false faces, the first one's called a two-face, TOO. This is the one that you compensate for, right? You say, okay, if somebody tells you you're too much something or not enough something, right? Too big, too small, too introverted, too extroverted, whatever, you immediately try to compensate and pull to a different face, right? The second false face is called the ooh face. This is the one that you want to be. And this sabotages people a lot, especially when they have mentors that certain styles work for greatly. And then the final one's just called the ew face. And it's the one that you're like, oh no, that's a bad one. I don't want to be that. So for you, Mr. Grant, here's what you are. So on stage, I absolutely believe that you are a lift. So with lift, you say, trust yourself, right? So the way that you get people to move to action, which is interesting, because if you go back and listen to all of you wonderful listeners, the whole beginning of this interview and the way that you're interviewing me, right? The phrases that you're using, you are using lift language, right? The more I believe that the magic is inside of me, and the way that you prompted me, even before we got on the interview of like, okay, real estate agents, like you got to make sure that it's targeted towards them. You put your people in the center and you think you should be in the passenger seat. The more they believe the magic is inside of them and that they can do it, the more likely they are to act. Now, here is where my second piece of charisma analysis comes in. On stage, I see you pulling a little bit too light, right? Which is funny because you're like, I think I'm a light, right? The problem is, so everybody that has a successful business has a successful process, right? Everybody needs a process. The process doesn't go away. It's just what you focus on, right? So a thing that you did absolutely fantastic is you have a lot of case studies, right? So as you go through and you're like, okay, the rocket fuel, hold on, let me get some quotes. As you're going through and you're like giving a case study stories of like, okay, it worked for this person, it worked for this business, worked for this real estate agent, it worked for this business, right? The more that you focus on that, which like I said, your presentation was incredible, the better and more likely people are to move to action because they're like, oh, I'm just like that person. Oh, I'm just like this person, right? However, with light, what happens is a lot of times lift people who pull to light are trying to remove themselves even as a guide. And I will be completely honest, you didn't go as far as making people feel abandoned, but that is like the extreme version of what happens when lifts pull to light, right? All of a sudden they're like, you know, this process, but like, you just got to do the process. And they don't feel like that guiding hand that takes them there, right? They feel a little bit abandoned. Like I said, you didn't pull to that on stage, but there were just some phrases that like sometimes can pull to light. So that is the first assessment. You did fantastic at all of those things with lift. The more case study stories that you tell with like this specific person did this, if they can do it, you can do it, right? The more people feel the magic is inside them, the more likely they are to act. Does it make sense so far?
That makes a ton of sense. Yes, okay, cool. I love it. I love it. I'm sitting back here like nerding out on every word you're saying. So I'm watching you very intently because you're coaching me, but this is all fascinating stuff.
It's very fun. It's very fun. So now the second charisma style is called compassion. So if you think of a face, FACE, so the first thing is the fan score. This is just how good you are at it. And then we have our three styles, ACE. So we have A, which is authority, we just did. Next is C, this is compassion. This is how you get someone to trust you. There are three different ways to get somebody to trust you. First one is steady. Steady people don't change their emotional cadence or emotional state based on the person that's across from them, right? Somebody can come to a steady and be like, oh my gosh, this is what happened. And the steady's like, okay, talk to me about that. How did you feel? They dive deeply into the emotions. How you would do this asynchronously, that just means like, if nobody's across from you, right? If it's one-sided, you deeply describe the emotions that somebody feels. The more deeply you describe those emotions and more accurately, the more likely they are to trust you. So that's steady. Next, we have fix. Fix people do not dive into the emotions. They dive into the content. context. So they dive into what happened, right? They're not like, oh, how do you feel? They're like, no, what happened? This happened, this happened, this happened. Of course you feel that way, right? I have a person in my in my program, his name's John. He calls it his no duh list. He's like, now when I talk to my wife, knowing that I'm a fix, if she says, oh, I feel so overwhelmed, he says, of course you feel overwhelmed. This happened, this happened, this happened. He gives context to that pain, right? So that's fix. Finally, we have mirror. Mirror people match the emotional cadence and emotional intensity of whoever is across from them. When somebody comes to a mirror and they're like, oh my gosh, this is what happened. A mirror's like, no, I'm a mirror, right? So based on that, what do you think that you are? Steady, fix, or mirror? I don't know if you like the guessing game. If you don't want to guess, you don't have to guess, but this is kind of fun.
If I was going to say it's like in my like day-to-day life, it would be pretty steady. I think if somebody comes to me and they're like, what you described, I'm like, I've often said like I have one face for my interaction with most people, but then when I get on stage, there's a whole like different side of Grant that comes out that isn't always super relevant in my like day-to-day life. So I would say very consciously in sales interactions and speaking, the last one, I try to mirror a lot of the energy that I can. But like in my day-to-day life, I'm more like the steady, like I have one face, no matter what's going on. Oh, okay. Yeah. Awesome. Like, so I don't know if that helps, if my guess is on point or not, but yeah.
Yes. Okay. So from on stage, I believe you are a steady. Totally nailed it. Yes, steady. So the two face that I have here, which is those false faces that you may be pulling to, is fix. The only reason I say this is because the language of a steady versus the language of fix is a little bit different, right? I know, and your listeners need to know this too. You absolutely killed it on stage. You absolutely killed it on stage. The one we'll actually talk about the most is the entertainment style. But with the language with a steady, how you would optimize this even more is describing the emotions that somebody feels rather than the context. So what happens when a steady pulls to a fix is sometimes they can look a little bit unfeeling, or like a word that some people use is like calculated instead of compassionate, right? What I mean by that is, so you did this several times throughout your speech in the right way, right? Where you say, you know, you feel overwhelmed, or you feel this, or you feel this, right? Going through those deep emotions, just walking through the context without assigning emotions to that context of like, you feel, or you post a million videos a day, which makes you feel, right? Just leaving them context alone sometimes can be like, oh, are they trivializing my pain? Just because you are so steady and people feel the compassion that way. So like I said, on stage, it was fantastic. That language, if you wanted to optimize it even more, it would be really diving into that emotion. And anytime you add context or an event, always attach an emotion to it. And then people will feel like, oh yeah, he's speaking my language. Oh yeah, he totally gets what I'm feeling. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%.
Cool.
I'm watching
okay,
you.
So now, yes. Yeah, I know. I keep going back and forth too. So now we have entertainment styles. So this is how you get somebody to pay attention to you. So there are 6 different entertainment styles. 3 of them are less intense and outwardly focused and facing, and 3 of them are more intense or person focused. So the first one is amaze. Amaze people are all about the wonder. They're all about the excitement, right? So amaze people get to decide what is exciting. This is like Ant-Man, right? Or like Paul Rudd, right? Or Jennifer Garner, right? They're like, wow, this is incredible. This is amazing. This is so fascinating, right? Once again, they decide what is exciting. Now, if you take an amaze and you shift the focus from the external to the person and you intensify it, you get excited, right? All of a sudden, all these exciting people, this is like Chris Pratt, right? All of a sudden, Chris Pratt gets on something and he's like, what's everybody? This is Chris Pratt. I'm so excited to be here, right? All of a sudden, we feel excited because they are excited, not because they're fascinated with something on the outside, but because of the person, right? We match their emotions. If they're excited, then we're excited, right? Then we move to charm. Charm people are all about the back and forth. Charm people decide where the spotlight goes. So they have very like tongue-in-cheek humor. This is like Iron Man or like Ryan Reynolds or Deadpool, right? All of a sudden, or like Laura like Gilmore, right? So they push the spotlight away from them and they tease somebody or they flirt with somebody and then they bring it back to themselves. And then they push it over here and then they bring it back to themselves, right? There's always a back and forth with that charm. They have that very tongue-in-cheek humor. Now, if you take a charm and you shift the focus from the external to the person and you intensify it, you get perform. I am a perform, right? Perform, people say, I belong in the spotlight. The reason why people pay attention to things is because the perform drags those things into the spotlight and they make it very theatrical, right? So that's a perform. Finally, we have impress. Impress, people decide what is important. They decide what is significant. This is like Dr. Strange, right? He says, this is important. Or like Idris Elba, this is important. This is significant. They get to decide what people think is important or significant. Now, if you take an impress and once again, you shift it from the external to the person and you intensify it, you get roar, right? Krista Mayshore, she's a roar. Gary Vee, he's a roar, right? They say, I am important. And if I am important and you should listen to me, this is what you should pay attention to, right? So we have amaze, which is decides what's exciting. We have excite, which is I am exciting. We have charm, which decides where the spotlight goes, that tongue-in-cheek humor. We have perform, which they say, I belong in the spotlight. We have impress, which decides what is important. And we have roar. They say, I am important. So based on these, I know I just gave you a lot of information. What do you think that you are?
I think I probably gravitate towards the charm that you described. If it wasn't charm, I think it was the fifth. So it was the third or the fifth one.
Impress.
Yeah. Impress. So
cool.
I think I gravitate towards charm, but then I notice I see some impress there too, at least in what I notice.
Okay, I love that. So on stage, so this is the one that I would say, and it wasn't that people weren't paying attention to, it was absolutely fantastic, but this is the one that I had underlined that I think could change your life. That would be so amazing. So I believe absolutely that you are an impress. However, on stage, you actually pull all the way to amaze. So you go from the fifth one all the way down to number one, right? So if you understand how this program is built, all of these cluster analyses, they pull to all of these different groups. Impress and amaze are very far away from each other, right? So it means that you are pulling to a two-face that is not you, even if it can feel kind of similar. Here's what I mean by that. So amaze, anybody who is an impress who tries to pull to an amaze, they try to make themselves, I'll give you some phrases that people use, smaller, less aggressive or less straightforward, nicer, brighter, more soft, right? A lot of times what happens is anytime somebody has something that they know they can move somebody to action, a lot of times because they feel like their authority comes in and they're like, I don't want to feel like there's too much pressure, they'll all of a sudden soften their entertainment style to make sure that people are processing their information in a way that doesn't feel threatening. However, with impress, the way that you get people's attention, and I want you to pay attention to, as you have gone along in this interview, your impress has actually come out more and more and more, right? Anytime you want somebody to pay attention to something, if you pay attention to how you emphasize things, you'll slow things down and you'll hit your words so that they have weight. When it's amaze, you will brighten and you'll go higher with your voice, right? And then you'll kind of talk like this for a minute, right? But when you want somebody to pay attention to something, right? The more you get into this, the more comfortable you are with the impress, right? Which means at the beginning, if you're like, okay, we are connecting, there can be a lot of different reasons for this, right? But at the beginning, if we're like, okay, we are connecting, this can happen on stage too, or on video, right? We're connecting and, I want you to like me. I want me to like you, right? We want this friendship to continue, whatever. And you've invited me on your show, right? If you are subconsciously trying to be like, okay, I want to put you in the center and I'm going to be like a little bit softer. And then the more excited you get about things, when you realize, no, this is important and this is significant, you're putting more weight in your words. So what I would say with stage presentations, right? And like I said, you did an absolutely fantastic job. I'll say that a million times over. But as you go through, I call it emotional accuracy. When you decide that something should stand out, you have to give emotional context to what you are saying to your audience, right? So with impress, anytime you think something is important, you need to make sure that they know that you think it is important, right? The way that people pull to amaze is they try to level that out so that everything kind of feels like it has the same level of importance so that they can decide what they want to pay attention to, right? Instead, when, once again, you can go back and listen to this interview too, when you think something is important, you actually give it weight. The more weight you give those things that are important, the more people will pay attention to them, right? People crave for people to tell them what context they should feel, right? They say, what emotion should I feel about this, right? I tell people all the time, like, numbers don't have any emotion unless you give it to them, right? So you could say like, yeah, I made $12 million yesterday and this happened and this happened. And like, because you said it that way, people will be like, okay, yeah, $12 million. Like maybe that's average for them, right? But if you're like, I made $12 million yesterday, right? Already they know, oh, that's a significant amount of money, just the way that you said it, right? So the context that you give it by the weight, especially as an impress, the weight that you give it, 2 ways that you would emphasize things the most as impress is you would slow it down and you would put that emphasis on it this way. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. 100%.
Cool. Yeah. So you, Mr. Grant, I believe are a lift, steady, impress. I believe that what we call your 2 faces, those false faces that you just want to watch out for, are light, fix, and amaze. So the combination of those things tells me you are actively trying to remove yourself from the center of things and you are trying to be softer, right? The interesting thing, so every time I have charisma styles analysis calls with people, every single person who comes into my program, I give them their styles at the very beginning so they don't have to guess, right? Because it is so imperative that they get them right, which hopefully you can see by now, right? But as we look at this, I can basically uncover like all their childhood trauma because I'm like, I know based on your delivery and based on the language that you're using, exactly what you're trying to compensate for, right? I know that if you are an impress and you're trying to be amazed, that at the beginning of this, you wanted to make sure that you weren't too straightforward, or maybe because I'm a woman or something like that. It's like you backed off a little bit. And then the more we got to know each other over the course of, this interview, the more comfortable you felt and the more you leaned into who you actually are, right? Same thing with your lift versus light, right? It's like when you try to remove yourself and you're like, oh yeah, just this process, I'm very confident in my process, right? You can remove yourself and say, no, but if I don't feel like I should guide them, or if at any point you're like, now I'm hiring other people, so I probably need to remove myself, right? Because a lot of times that people have teams, they try to pull themselves back so that people don't expect them to be on every single call or on every single whatever. Instead, it's saying, no, trust yourself, right? I'm going to guide you. And the people that I put in place, I promise will guide you, right? It's trust yourself. I got you. Like, we're going to make sure that you get there. I'm going to make sure you know all of the turns that you're taking to make sure you can succeed, right? Same thing with that steady versus fix. It shows me that you're trying to be more analytical about things, which is great, right? It means that you like processes, but you even said this, it's like, you're pretty steady, right? Those emotions, you create space for people, right? Like I said, I didn't meet you before, Krista, so you have to tell me if all this is accurate, but people in your life probably tell you that like, yeah, I feel like I can confide in you. I feel like you know exactly how I feel about things, right? You create this space for me in order to tell you about my emotions, and you empathize with me, right? You say, yeah, okay. Oh, wow. I'm so sorry that you feel overwhelmed. I'm so sorry that you feel this way, right? Instead of trying to contextualize it and be like, oh yeah, okay, well, just tell me what happened, right? Just tell me what happened. What would you say? Do you think this is accurate or do we need to make some adjustments?
I think that it's accurate based on what you said. I think if I like let my wife listen to this, she'd be like, you don't create no space. Like she may come back with some different context, but I absolutely would agree with everything that you said. And I'm so incredibly fascinated by what it is that you said. I constantly want to know, okay, how can I improve? What is it that I could do that I can make a subtle change here, a subtle change here, a subtle change there? And I'm deeply fascinated by what it is that you've like coached me up on here from a staging standpoint. I have more questions. I don't have more time, unfortunately, but I have more questions.
Absolutely.
The whole process of what you just went through is amazing. I would love to know how I could get better in presentations, how I could get better on stage, how I could get better as a podcast host. And it sounds like, based on everything that I just heard you say, like I could just lean into more of who I really believe that I am. Yes. I totally agree that there is, I don't know if it's a face, but a face that I wear, being conscious of thoughts, feelings, so on and so forth. And so sometimes I push myself down to, I don't know if perform is the right word, but I absolutely agree that there's not, yeah, I would agree. Like, I don't know that I'm 100%, I know authentic being the dirty word, but I certainly feel like I could be more of myself on stage. There's one presentation I've given in the last 5-6 months where I was like, that's who Grant is. Like, if you want to know who Grant is, like, that's the guy. I was very raw in the way that I communicated. It was probably, I would say, in the last 6 years, my best presentation without question. It was also my most unfiltered conversation. A lot of bad language, a lot of deep emotional context, a lot of stories from my past. And so that's so fascinating. And that was a presentation I left, and I was like, I got to find more stages where I can be that guy, because that dude was awesome. Like he just killed it in there. So I love
the crazy thing. I love that you said, if I can add one more thing, when you said like lean into who you really are. So the beautiful thing about charisma hacking is I am fully aware, and it's the reason why authenticity is like kind of a dirty word for me, because I'm like, no, you can't measure that, right? The cool thing is with each one of these things, like there is a measurable metric, right? There's a data point that we measure. So if people have drop-off rates, we know that their entertainment style is not correct, that they're using the wrong one, right? If people aren't engaging the way that you want, whether on stage or on a podcast or on video, we know that it's your compassion style. And if people make it to the end of your speech or make it to the end of your video and they don't convert, we know that it's your authority style, right? We've done the work to make sure that we know exactly where each of these styles are. The cool thing about it with leaning into who you really are is everything that I just told you. I'm not trying to create a new version of Grant, right? The interesting thing is, if we look at how you are in your real life and truly, like, even as you've changed on this podcast talking to me, right? As you're saying, like, that is the real Grant, that one, or like every single thing that you kind of grew into, even over the last like 20 minutes, right? Those are things that you're doing in your real life, right? Every single person that's listening to this needs to realize people do like you, right? So why would you change things when people do like you? They do pay attention to you in real life. However, when you get on video, all of a sudden that belief goes away, right? And like you forget about all of the proof of like all of these people who are your fans, who do pay attention to you, right? You have friends, people trust you. We're using the exact same systems, the exact same tools that you get to get your friends to trust you, to get your customers to trust you on video, right? And like, if you're parenting your kids, or if you have anybody who's ever taken your advice, you have authority, right? You move people to action. We are taking those skills, the things that I told you are like, oh, in your everyday life, the way that you get your kids to move to action, the way that you get your friends to take your advice, you lift them, right? You say, trust yourself, right? This is exactly, the magic is inside of you, right? Here's how I would guide you to do this, whatever, right? Every single one of your listeners should also know, it's like all of these charisma styles aren't things that are created out of thin air. We are making sure that you have that advantage that you have in real life, right? We're saying, oh, exactly how you said, like, how can I find more stages where I can be that Grant, right? So many people hate doing video because it's exhausting, but it's exhausting because you are not being yourself, right? It goes back to our rule of, if it feels awkward, it is awkward, right? It's like, oh, if on stage it feels off, then it is off. But now we have the system to say what is off and how do we change it? Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. Okay. We're at the part where we unfortunately have to end. I'm going to go on record and say this I don't remember how many episodes we are on the podcast. It's like 150, 130, 140, 150, something like that. Without question, this is my favorite episode. So,
oh my gosh, thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming on here. And I would say that we could like end our podcast today, and this would probably, like, I would be like satisfied with my podcasting career. So thank you so much for
You're so awesome.
An amazing podcast. Normally this is the part where I would say, how can people go follow you? I'm going to ask you a different question. How can I, Grant Wise, work with you to continue to develop myself? Now, obviously you're going to answer the question for everybody else who may want to come work with you, yes. But I would love to work with you on an ongoing basis. How could I do that? I
would love that. So for every single person, go to charismahacking.com. Charismahacking.com. That is the place. And for Grant, obviously, you can also text me. But everybody, charismahacking.com. That's how we have so many different things, you guys. There's lots of different ways that you can work with me on lots of different levels. It was really cool. My husband, I know I will make this very short. I'm a long-winded lady, but my husband was saying yesterday with position coaches, there's little league football position coaches, right? And a defensive coordinator, All they have to do is get the kids to put their feet in the right place and line up in the right place. If they can just get the kids to line up in the right place, they don't have to go over all of the super technical things that they learn about football later on down the line, right? With charisma styles, really, that's what we're doing. We're putting your feet in the right place. We're making sure you line up in the right place so that every other thing you do in your business is effective, right? That every other thing that you do within grants, programs, right? Within real estate in general, work, right? Because we don't want you to repurpose videos that aren't effective, right? Even if you're comfortable on video, it's like that only puts more content out into the world that's ineffective, right? Every single piece of video, don't measure it by did I publish, measure it by did I do the things in that video that I was supposed to and then published, right? Then you can actually measure it with the numbers as well. So yeah, charismahacking.com. Woo, I'm so excited.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to go to charismahacking.com, and I probably will just text you too. But if you're listening to this, you need to go to charismahacking.com too. We've talked about this so often, like we're not living in a time where video is an option. It is a requirement if you want to have success at a high level, especially with what we do, what you do in real estate. And so go to charismahacking.com 1000% and take action on whatever McCall tells you to do. I knew from the moment I met you, I was going to be around you. So thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you for coaching me, hopefully giving a ton of inspiration to people that are listening to this. They can get help and they can certainly become better and more proficient at what they do so that they can engage their audience at a higher level, convert more customers in their business. McCall, thank you so much. This was amazing. I appreciate you. Yes,
thank you.
Thank you all for continuing to listen to the Client Generation Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. Peace. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Client Generation Podcast. Please make sure that you rate and review this episode so that we can continue to bring you more incredible guests to help you grow your business. Thanks and have an amazing day.